What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on a 2018 Volvo XC90. Today on the XC90, we are going to be covering how to refresh your front suspension, focusing on the front struts. In front of us, we have one of the kits available on fcpo.com, which includes your struts from Bilstein. We have new spring purchase, bump stops, bellows, strut mounts, hardware. These two big boys right here are going to be for our lower pinch bolt. And we also have axle bolts on here, which will be needed on some of the less lifted, if you will, non-SUV spot chassis vehicles. So this is going to cover your S60, your S90, your V60, V60 cross country, V90, V90 cross country, XC60, and of course the XC90 that is behind us. These are going to last anywhere from 80 to 100,000 miles. That's not to say that they can't last a little bit longer or fail even sooner. It really depends on the kind of driving that your vehicle is doing. Because again, your car does the driving, not you, and what kind of conditions the roads are. This vehicle behind us has almost 100,000 miles. It's all original suspension. So we're going to be covering how to replace that on that today. Something to keep in mind as these components wear over time, you can start to get some clunking or knocking from the front end, in which case you'd want to do some diagnosing before hitting it with the parts can. And sometimes it can be as simple as an end link. Sometimes the strut mount bearing has failed or the spring perch has worn out and is clunking against the metal. So a visual inspection is going to help, and then maybe getting a second set of hands and a pry bar or a second set of ears will go a long way. You'll notice on these Bilstein units, they have a separate lower spring perch plate. If you're installing a genuine unit, these more than likely are going to be fixed, which we'll cover later during the assembly process. There's a special tool that comes into play, and whether you use it or not, there is a big focus on how we align these shocks in the front end. These ride on a fork. They're not a standard McPherson setup, so these don't actually spin when you turn your wheel left and right, unlike a traditional McPherson setup. So a little bit different, but definitely doable. But before we get too focused on that, let's take a look at some of these tools we're going to need. All right, for this DIY, we have two 1/2-inch drive ratchets. One is a torque wrench, two 3/8 drive. One is also a torque wrench, and a couple adapters and extensions for the two. Really no more than 3 inches is what we need here. As far as sockets go, we have a 10, an 8, and a 7. On the 1/2-inch side, we have a 13, an 18, and a 21. The 21 specifically only for our spring compressor tool that we're using today, which, by the way, if you have one like this, then this job should be no problem. If you don't have the proper tool and you don't want to spend the money on the tool, then consider the money that you're saving on doing the DIY yourself and taking your strut assemblies to your local independent shop and having them disassemble and assemble them for you. Moving on, we have a T40. That's going to be kind of our specialty socket of the day. And we have a lug bolt or lug nut sockets. This is a 19 mil. We also have a soft rubber hammer. We have a CTA pass-through socket set. This is 7466. This is going to be super helpful for doing this DIY. I really recommend it. We also have some electric tools, 1/2-inch impact, 3/8 electric ratchet. And now for the last kind of white elephant in the room here, this is this Volvo specialty tool. A couple things about this tool. It's a little bit pricey, and it only works with genuine strut assemblies. The new Bilsteins that we're installing, you'll notice from the intro that the base plate where the spring perch rides on is separate to the strut assembly. On the factory Volvo units, those are one piece, in which case this tool works. So even if you want to use the tool, the Bilstein one does not fit, we'll still set up the tool. We'll show you how to use it with the old strut assembly that we pull out and just show you what it actually does. But the reality is we are going to replace this whole $100, $200 tool with this Sharpie pen and a lot of our attention. So definitely, as far as specialty tools, really the only thing is a spring compressor. But again, if you're installing the genuine units and you want to go full out, then there is the specialty alignment tool. That is because the strut assembly needs to be aligned in a certain way to go back in the car, since it does not twist around like a traditional McPherson strut. But we'll get to that when we start assembling and disassembling everything. Also needed but not pictured here is going to be a free screw jack or floor jack, depending on where you're working. Honestly, this DIY, probably one of the easier things you can do on these newer spot chassis cars and on the ground. Lift not needed, but for our viewing, for your viewing pleasure, and our shooting pleasure, the lift is going to be the way to go. As always, be sure to watch the whole DIY all the way through, especially if you're looking for tools in case we add anything or sub anything out. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, before we get up in the air and take the car apart, we want to pay attention to ride height. Ride height is going to mean where the car sits when the car is on the ground, riding on the ground. When we go to tighten everything up later, the knuckle mainly, we want to make sure that we're using our screw jack and our floor jack to raise the suspension and tighten all the bolts at its normal position, which means what it's going to sit at when it's riding. If you tighten everything down at full droop, once the car goes on the ground, you're going to risk tearing or prematurely wearing all the bushings, as well as creating almost like a spongy-like ride for your car. So you definitely want to avoid that. So the easiest thing you can do is take a tape measure or ruler, whatever you have, from the center of your wheel, the center of the cap if you like, the center of the hub if you have the wheel off already, to the bottom of the fender. Measure that distance, and then later on when you're tightening everything down, make sure you reach that same distance between the hub and the fender, and then snug everything down at that height. For us, it's just 20¼ inches, so nothing too crazy. We can easily recreate that on the ground. All right, now with that, let's get the car up in the air. Let's get some wheels off and go from there. I'm gonna start by taking off our wheel, 5 19mm lug bolts. You can see I already had this one off. I had to desaltify the car before starting because it was just that bad. We're gonna zap off the remaining lugs and then just be ready to catch the wheel because these are lug bolts and there are no studs to hold it in place. So with that, let's get a little bit closer. Let's get some brackets off so we can free up the harness for the ABS or the wheel speed sensor, as well as our soft line, and then we'll go from there. We're gonna start with the 7mm holding our soft line. I'm just gonna go in with the electric ratchet and zap it out, and we'll put that bolt to the side, and then we're gonna unhook the tab here. It just kind of keys in to the upright, and this can hang out like this. We have an 8mm on the other side. Let's do that next. And same thing, we can unhook that little bracket, set our bolt to the side. You can thread the bolts back in if you don't wanna lose them or you don't have a good place for them. It's debris. That can hang out like so. All right, on the front side, you can see here's our end link. Let's head over to the front side and take care of that end link next. First, I'm gonna go in with a 18mm socket and just kind of break it free. I'm not gonna turn it too much. Really, maybe half a turn is all we're looking for. We don't wanna spin the ball joint end and total out our end link. That's all we need. Now we're gonna go in with our pass-through socket set, which is gonna have the 18 and our T40 on our ratchet. Make sure that when you put the T40 in, that it is keyed all the way in. The last thing you wanna do is to strip that out, and then you're gonna have to cut it out. So be sure you get that nice and situated. Take your time with it. This is why the pass-through socket set is so important. It's kind of tight back here since this doesn't spin, and this just makes it a lot easier to work with. Next, we're gonna tackle our pinch bolt. And for that, we're gonna need a 13mm socket. This bolt is reusable, so we're gonna go ahead and reuse this one today. Not a bad deal. All right, we have one more pinch bolt, and that's gonna be down below. You can see the end sticking out here. Let's head over on the back side and get that baby out. We have an 18mm right here. I like to break these free first with the ratchet versus hitting them with the impact, just because these can be a little bit tough or a little bit crusty. You don't wanna mess with the threads on the knuckle too much. And then this bolt is one-time use, so we're gonna be tossing this since we have a new one in our kit. Now with that loose, we can start working this fork down. Just give it a couple left and right twists, and it should slide down from the strut assembly or the shock absorber. All right, this baby can hang out there in the wheel well. Now let's head up top into the engine bay. We have a couple bolts holding on the whole strut assembly. And as we lower those bolts, we'll reach down underneath, grab the strut body, and slowly feed it out from underneath the car. All right, we are under the hood of the XC90, and if I didn't mention it before, we're working on the passenger side, the right side of the vehicle. However, the steps are going to be identical for both sides. Here is where we start to pay attention carefully to what we're doing. It's going to be super important as we start to assemble our new strut assemblies. One thing you can do for starters is you can mark this hardware, and you can use a dry erase marker if you don't want it to be permanent, or a Sharpie. if you want it to be in the exact same spot when you go to install your new strut assembly. There's going to be a lot of play as these 10mm bolts loosen up or as you're tightening them down. In our case, the engine bay's dirty enough where when I remove these 3 bolts, it's going to be nice and clean underneath, and those are going to be my guides to just help line everything back up the way it was when we took it apart. Secondly, kill the spider. Sorry, spider, but it wasn't for you today. Secondly, we have the inner of our strut mount. I'm going to pull this little black protective nub that goes on the threaded end of the strut. And you'll see that there's a little notch cut out on the strut mount that I've highlighted in blue. That's going to help us orientate ourselves, so when we build our new strut assembly, we know which direction the strut mount needs to face inside of the strut tower. You can rotate it all 3 ways and it's going to line up enough to get the bolt started. So it's not going to be helpful if you don't pay attention before you take it apart. So in this case, little notch on the strut mount, always pointing towards the inner strut mount bolt on both sides. It's the same thing. So with that, once you're aware of that, let's go ahead and zap out these 3 10mm bolts. These are going to be replaced, again, part of our kit. So we'll toss those, and then I'm going to be prepared to catch the strut assembly on the bottom. Second set of hands is a nice to have if you have someone there to catch that for you. But with that, let's get these out of the way. And here is our old strut assembly. We're going to take this over to the table and we're going to talk about how we're going to mark it up so that you don't have to buy a special tool at home. I'll still show you how to use a special tool. All right, over at the workbench, we have our old strut assembly completely untouched other than pulling it out of the car. We're going to use our paint pen to basically mark everything and anything that you think may be important. I'm going to show you what I think is important and will help us assemble our new strut assemblies, especially these Bilstein units without the special tool. First, we're going to start at the bottom. The bottom of the strut assembly and what the tool works on starts off with these 2 bottom holes right here. These 2 bottom holes are what the tool is going to engage on. So we're going to use the center of it as our reference. And if you look at the center of that gap is the bottom of our spring perch. So we can draw on that spring perch and we can draw on the old strut assembly. You'll notice that this plate is fixed to the genuine assembly, unlike the Bilstein, which is loose. But again, it's important that we mark everything because we're going to transfer these marks over to our new units. From there, if you really wanted to, you could draw a line across this whole spring and just mark it up top so that you can have a point of where it lines up with the top of the spring perch and mount. So just to show you what I'm talking about, if we wanted to do that, we could argue that this line, you know, if we had a straight ruler or something, we'd be like, oh, it's going to come all the way up here, and these 2 are going to look like that. You can get a little bit more creative with it, but this one's not going to really be my point of reference, but it doesn't hurt to have it. Looking at the top of the strut mount, we have another spring perch, and that one just happens to end almost at the same notch that's in our strut mount. So again, we're going to mark that baby. We're going to mark the strut mount, and that's going to be our marks that we're going to pass over to our new spring perch and our new strut mount. Before we start taking anything apart though, we're going to throw this into the Volvo specialty tool just to show you how you would actually use this. Again, assuming that maybe you're installing the genuine Volvo units that are fixed to the shock body. So let's head over to the vise. I'll show you how the tool works, how you put it together, and then how it actually helps line everything up. And then we'll go back to this, we'll take it apart, and we'll build our new one with our mighty pen and our spring compressor. All right, we're gonna assemble our tool first. Here's our Volvo tool. You'll notice there is a little locking screw that's gonna help secure this rod. Make sure that's backed out so that the cylinder is nice and open for said tool. You'll notice that our rod has a little dowel cut out in it, and that's where this is gonna lock in. It's important because at the top, I've highlighted it with blue paint pen. This line is gonna help us line the whole assembly up. So it's very important that this goes in the right way and not just haphazardly. So we're gonna get this baby kind of started here. Keep it as straight as we can. Sometimes it needs a little bit of a luff tap. It's a tight fit from a rubber mallet. And then we're gonna just go in with our fingers. Don't need to go too crazy. Now, our tool is perfectly lined up with the body of the double tool, tool. Straight line, straight tool, even. Great. We're gonna take this, put it into our vise, and we're gonna cinch it down as good as we can. You'll notice these two dowels on our tool. Those go in those two holes that I was showing you at the bottom of the stock assembly. This is sleeved for two different size shock bodies. So depending on the car you're working on, for our XC90, we need the smaller sleeve out of the two. So you can feed them on. You can see this one has a lot of play. It's gonna be too big. This one's a little bit tighter, so that's what we wanna go with. So we're gonna feed that into our tool. And again, focusing on the two bottom holes of that plate, the larger ones, we're gonna key that into the tool. And really what I'm using this tool for is just to show you the alignments and how they line up. So there, it's nice and engaged. It's not gonna spin anywhere. And now we're gonna look at the top of our strut mount. We have our other part of our tool. The easier way to remember this is the numbered side is gonna be for when you're doing the driver's side. The blank side is gonna be for when you're doing the passenger side. You can see the curvature of the tool changes. So number up, that would be for the left side. That would look something like this. Passenger side, we need it to be like this. We have two holes that allow us to thread our included bolts onto the top of the strut mount. And you can see the tool points at the end of our other tool, the blue line here. So in a perfect world, let's say we move that around a little bit, that should line up just like that. So when you're assembling your genuine or your Volvo OE strut assembly, this is gonna be locked in, and this is gonna help line up the spring, the perch, top and bottom, and the strut mount. So that's why we made those lines. We have where our spring perch is gonna be relative to the bottom spring perch plate. And we also have where our spring perch up top is gonna join our strut top. Now the point being here that the end of the springs are flat, right? They're not gonna be any different when you go to assemble your new strut assembly. They can't change. So these two marked positions are always gonna be fixed on the spring. So that's why the spring is gonna set our alignment for us. That's why we're using the spring perches or the end of them as our markers, really. So we're gonna ditch this tool. I can show you what it looks like when we feed the Bilstein unit back in. It'll maybe roughly help you secure your alignment a little bit more, but once you have it pretty close, these don't spin. As long as it's pretty close and it goes back in the car, it's gonna do its job just fine. The spring is gonna compress correctly and the car is gonna ride well. So not the end of the world. Definitely not something you need, again, unless you're doing the OE genuine shock assembly, then would be beneficial, but I think you could still get away with it. Just being careful and using your paint pen. All right, we're gonna pull this out, set it over at the workbench. We'll show you how to compress the spring, take it apart, save the spring for the new one, and start assembling everything. All right, let me start by saying that this car, again, is a 2018. It is 2025 January. It is 9 degrees outside. That's not important. The spring perches on these cars, at least at 7 years old, are not in horrible shape. You could argue that you could reuse them, but again, they're part of the kit, and they're fairly inexpensive, and it's cheap insurance to avoid some clunking in your front end. Nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is if you're just pulling off your old one, that's one less thing you have to mark. On the spring perch, you'll notice there is an open hole and a closed hole. The open hole is going to help line up the spring perch on your spring plate, as this one also has the two open holes like the bottom of our stock unit. These are the ones that would lock into that tool. We're going to line those up. We have really only one way to put this perch in. It's also kind of hex shaped up top, which fits in with the perch, so you're not going to be able to 180 it and put it in the wrong way. With those two lined up, another neat tech tip with the Bilsteins, with these plates being separate, you can literally take the new plate, slide it up the body of your old strut assembly, and use something like a screwdriver, if you want it to be exact, and use that to line it up with the bottom holes on the stock plate or the factory plate, and then you can make your mark and just literally transfer your mark over as you had it on the stock assembly. This is probably a little extra, probably not necessary, but you have it and you can do it. Why not? Cheap insurance. So now we have our spring perch ready to rock and roll with our spring plate. That's going to go onto our new shock body. And you'll notice that the Bilstein has a collar here, or like kind of a cuff. This is what's going to prevent it from working on the genuine Volvo tool, which is why we're using all our markings as insurance. Before we get that on, you'll notice that this comes with the Bilstein shock. This and a little plastic like sleeve that sits inside of here. I think that's just for shipping. There's nowhere else that that applies to, at least on the XC90. But we're going to have to put this onto our shock body. That's going to protect the dust seal up top. I don't know why they include them separately. Typically these are always pre-installed, but nonetheless, we're going to install them here today. So before we put that on though, we need to make sure that this spring plate is on. Otherwise, that spring plate's not going to go on and you're going to have a bad time. So spring plate on, we can do the soft perch after. Then that guy slides over, and we can use a rubber mallet to just get it started all the way around, and we're going to evenly tap it all the way down until we bottom it out. With that baby in place, spring perch can come down. Beautiful. All right, those two are locked in, no problem. Now we're going to work on taking apart the old strut assembly. Once we have that apart, we'll look at the strut mount and we'll compare it to our new one with the spring perch. We'll line these up how we need them to be. We'll add the bellow and the bump stop to it, and then we'll work on making them one. So let me get our spring compressor ready, which is going to be right here. All right, I'm going to get this baby lighting on a decent amount of the coils here. And again, this is what you need that 21mm socket for. Now, is it advisable to go ham with the impact on this? No, especially if it's not your tool. You can go nice and slowly with a regular ratchet. For us, it's our tool. We've done it a ton of times. Well experienced, well versed with it, so we're going to use the impact. Otherwise, go by hand. But if you are going by hand, a second set of hands is going to make it easier to hold this. This is kind of the one-person solution here. Spring is more than compressed. Now we're going to grab our 6mm hex. This is our counter hold tool. We're going to get our 18mm pass-through socket set. That's going to go on like so. Make sure that this 6mm hex is seated all the way in, similar to when we did our end link. You don't want that to strip out, so you're going to have a really bad time. Sometimes these strut mounts can get a little bit stuck in here. The rubber kind of binds with the spring. One thing also to note, and I always forget this, the genuine units have a collar here at the bottom that hold the bottom of the bellow in place. That's not something you see on the replacements. So just keep in mind, if you're getting hung up, release that bellow from the collar and you can get it off. There you go. Just to give you a better view of what was holding that on, that's this right here. And again, this spring perch is still in fine shape, but you can't save it, funny enough, because the strut assembly won't let you. So you definitely need a new one. All right, before we get the new thing put together, let's take a look at these babies over here. So here is our marks that we made, and actually this moved in the process of taking it apart. So it's a really good thing that we marked them together before everything went apart. So we're going to recreate our new strut mount to look exactly like this, using the end of the spring perch with our marking that we're going to transfer over to our new mount. All right, the first thing I'm doing is positioning the strut mount on the table the same way the old one is. You'll notice all three of these are the same, with the exception of one having this little ear. Let me highlight this so you can see it a little bit better. So this little ear is going to be bigger than the other two. That's going to be a big player in our alignment. So these two are positioned the same way, which means that the line that I want to transfer over is going to be right after this notch here. So we're going to make that mark. Then we're going to mark our spring perch like so. And now these two babies can live happily ever after like that. If you want to, you'll remember we did another mark on the back side. Again, this moved, but pretend these are lined up. You can also recreate that on the back of your mount if you'd like, which we will roughly, because why not? That's going to be a rough one. That's going to be our main one. All right, we have a new bump stop and bellow. The smaller end of the bellow is going to key in to these 3 little tabs inside of the strut mount. So to do that, you're just going to kind of put it over, squeeze this baby down, give it a couple twists until it really locks in. Take a look inside, make sure that the bellow isn't doing this inside and not allowing it to seat in properly. Should be able to hold the weight up of everything. Next, we're going to take our bump stop, rounded edge facing up. We're going to drop that baby in, and then we're just going to literally compress the bellow and push down with our palm until we seat that all the way in. A little dielectric grease can help kind of put that in. What I found to work though is taking the strut assembly, giving it a little bit of what it's going to be doing the rest of its life. And this one's still crooked. Let me straighten that out. All right. Give it a little wiggle inside. Make sure it's not going to fall. It's okay if it does. It's still going to be on the shaft. It still will do its job, but if you can have it stay as one piece, even better. All right, at this point, the top mount is ready to rock and roll. Make sure these stay lined up. The bottom is ready to rock and roll. It's gonna be moving around on you, but that's okay. Just make sure that the perch and the plate are lined up correctly. So now comes the fun part. We're gonna take our spring. We're gonna seat this baby on here. All right, we're gonna keep our eyes on these, make sure those 2 are together. And then we'll have to rotate or spin depending on where the stop of our coil ends up on the stop of our spring perch. So just roughly, again, we had that secondary mark that we made in the back before. That is pretty dang in line with the one on the back side, which is what we based that off of, which is great. That means, again, it's not really going to be any other place. The spring is only so long and it's only positioned in one way, so you can't adjust the ends of the spring. So as long as these 2 are still lined up top, we'll be good. Always make sure that the spring is butted up to the stop on the spring perch, otherwise it's not gonna do its job. We're gonna take our new locking nut, get that started. Oftentimes these Bilstein units will come with a washer. There was no washer when we took this apart, so we can ditch that out. It's not gonna be necessary for this application. Just to show you what this looks like standing up, you can see the front side. Our strut mount has its spring perch and strut mount lined up still. That's exactly what we want as we loosen that up. All right, we're gonna set that on the ground. Spring is still compressed. We're gonna move to our 19mm pass-through socket. The Bilstein has a larger nut. We're gonna get that baby seated in there. We're gonna get our 6mm hex locked in all the way. That stays the same size. Torque spec for the 19mm is 60 Newton meters. It's not a whole lot. You can achieve that just with the hand tool and snugging it up. Once everything's back in the car and the car's on the ground, if you want to take a socket and a torque wrench to this nut, once everything's installed, you can do that as well, just as extra insurance, but not mandatory. You don't want to strip this out either. You can break the hex tool and or strip out the hex head, making it the last time you use the spring. Now, one more time, we're gonna check everything, make sure it's still lined up as we undo the spring compressor tool, and then we'll go from there. So, bottom plate and spring perch, need a little adjustment, there we go, that looks good. Top looks good. Everything's butting up to its stops, that's great. Let's loosen up this spring compressor. All right, now that we're getting close and there's some tension on everything, keeping it from moving, you can go until she's free. And now we have a fully built, ready to rock and roll XC90 strut assembly. We're gonna do one more thing now, which is gonna be to mark our little notch on the strut mount, just to help us put this back in, again, facing that inner strut bolt tower so we don't forget later. And just to show you Why this doesn't work in the tool, we're gonna fit it onto the tool. It'll be rough, but it'll still show us if we got our alignments correct or not, which I know you did. I know we did. To fit the Bilstein in here, we removed both of the sleeves as none of these fit on this strut body. But we do have the two bottom dowels kind of locked in, just enough to keep it from moving. If you do move it a little bit, then the thing's gonna spin. Again, we have that collar that's built into the Bilstein, which won't allow it to fit in the tool. Locked up top, and there you go. There's the end of our tool, lined up perfectly with the line up top. And that was literally just using a paint marker and a little bit of patience. So definitely not necessary if you just take your time and mark things up before you take them apart. All right, at this point, this strut body is ready to rock and roll. Let's head back into the XC90. All right, strut assembly is built. We're gonna feed this into the strut tower area and then reposition. I'm gonna grab a second set of hands. Mike, our camera operator, producer, director, the guy that makes me look good. He's gonna hold this up into the strut tower once I have it in so that I can get the hardware started above. Typically you can do this by yourself, but maybe I just don't have enough arm length. It's just a little bit awkward to reach and try to get it up there. So he's gonna help me with that. Again, we're gonna focus on the notch that we painted in blue, same thing that we looked at before we took it apart. That's gonna face the inside of the strut tower. And then as we get all the bolts snugged up, we'll line everything up and then we'll torque it down. If this is fighting you, sometimes you can just lift up on the upright. And that'll give you a little bit more room if you need it. All right. I'm just gonna rest it on the fork. I'm gonna hop up top and Mike is gonna feed it up into the tower. Now we're gonna switch over to the torque wrench and torque all three down to 24 Newton meters. Not a whole lot. So if you don't have a torque wrench, just snug them up. They're small bolts. They don't need a lot. Top side is done. If you still have your little dust cap from the factory, you can try sticking these on. They don't really bite as well. There's not enough thread coming through for the Bilstein unit, but you can still leave them on there and see how long they last. All right, with that, let's head back into the wheel well. We'll get the fork started and then we'll talk about how to tighten everything up down there. All right, now we're gonna feed our fork assembly back on. I like to put a little bit of silicone grease, electric grease mainly, on the knuckle to kind of help it. These Bilsteins are a tight fit, but once you get them going. All right, now that I have it started a little bit, let's get a little bit more underneath the car. We're gonna show you the collar at the bottom of the knuckle where the stop is for the strut assembly. That's how you're gonna know that it's fully seated. Then we'll get our screw jack and our floor jack if you're on the ground, set the ride height, and get some hardware in and tighten everything down. So under the knuckle, you can see the bottom here, and there's kind of a lip that's built into it that's smaller than the diameter of the actual sleeve. Once the bottom of the shock hits that lip, that's how you know this is fully seated in. So just something to keep in mind. You'll see there's a little bit of that electric grease in there, like I mentioned, just to help slide on the shock since it's a tight fit. I'm gonna tap it up some more with the soft rubber mallet until we at least get lined up with the lower control arm bolt, and then we'll go from there. That's pretty close. It's not quite there yet though. Let's get our new bolt in. This is the lower pinch bolt. I'm just gonna feed it in from the back side and get it through to the other side. We're gonna snug this up really close, but not tight enough where it's not gonna allow everything to move when we set this to ride height. But I just wanted to be close enough so that once we are at ride height, we can hop in with the torque wrench and tighten everything down. I'm looking at the gap between the control arm and the fork, and we still have a little bit of gap there. That's good. It's not fully squished up against the bushing. That's exactly what we want. All right, before we get the pinch bolt up there snugged up too, we're gonna get the bolt just started by hand. And then same thing, we'll get the 13, not as close as the bottom bolt. It's not that crucial yet, but we do wanna save us some time for once the torque wrench is ready. Now we're gonna grab our screw jack and our floor jack. We're gonna set the car to ride height again, taking note of that measurement between the hub and the fender before we took everything apart. And then we're gonna get both of these bolts tightened down. We also wanna make sure that the knuckle fully seats at the bottom of the shock as we're putting the screw jack up in the air. So let's get that situated. We're gonna torque this bottom 18 mil to 140 degrees, then an additional 180 degrees. So we'll start with the 140 first. Again, we're at ride height now. We're gonna mark it. And now we're gonna do the top pinch bolt. That's a 13 mil that gets torqued to 60 Newton meters. As I lower the screw jack, I'm gonna feed the sway bar end link back in, and then we'll get eye level with it. We'll get that snugged up. We'll get our soft line and our ABS line back in place and go from there. All right, let's get rid of the screw jack. So we'll get eye level with the end link, snug that up. We're gonna go in with our T40 and our 18 mil pass-through setup. We're just gonna get that 18 to start snugging up a little bit. It's not gonna take a whole lot. And then from there, we're gonna switch over to the torque wrench. Again, the goal is to keep the ball joint from spinning on the end link. If you do it the opposite, that's how you smoke your end link, and then this whole thing is useless. You're gonna have to replace it because you're gonna wear it out. Torque wrench, 18 mil socket, set to 80 Newton meters. Let's get it snugged up. With that secured, let's get our soft line back in place. It's gonna be the tinier 7 mil X bolt. Torque spike on both the 7 and the 8 mil is only 5 Newton meters if you're gonna put a torque wrench to it, which is nothing. As soon as it bottoms out, less than 1/8 of a turn, you're good to rock and roll. Let's do the 8 mil on the back. With that 8 mil secured, that means our strut assembly is fully bolted in, knuckle is fully secured, end link is good to go. Soft line back in its place. ABS harness, wire harness, back in its place. We are good to go. If you've already done the other side, let's get our wheel back on. Let's get those lug bolts started, then we'll drop it on the ground, torque it in the proper sequence, and we're gonna call this DIY done. If you like this video, my good people, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comments section below. And if you like this DIY, and you'd like to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.